Well, hi, I'm Matt, one of the leaders at Maybridge. Hope you're doing okay this week. Please do be in touch with me or someone else at church if you're not. Or get in touch if you're doing great but you just haven't spoken much with anyone from church for a while. I at least would love to hear from you. And if you're just checking us out, thanks for doing so. Of course, you're very welcome to be anonymous if you prefer, or also do get in touch if you want to find out more. But if you know anything about us, you may well know we're a church that is all about Jesus. That's one of our values. We're all about Jesus. And because of that, we are at the moment spending time each week looking at what Jesus says and does in the Gospel of Matthew, an eyewitness account of his life. The story we're looking at today is a classic, but with a twist, as so often when we read about Jesus. And it's Matthew chapter 8 from verse 5. Great story, lots of relevance for right now, and we'll see that as we move through. So let's dive straight in from Matthew 8 verse 5. And it says this: When Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, asking for help. Lord, he said, my servant lies at home paralysed, suffering terribly. So the scene for the story is the town of Capernaum. This was on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. At the time, it was not a big deal, just a fairly standard little Israeli town, maybe only 1,500 people. I've actually been there a number of times, and I can imagine it was a great place to live. Brilliant weather, by the sea, fresh fish at the market every day. What's not to like? And if you read the Gospels, Jesus spent a fair bit of time there. It's not where he grew up, but it's very close. So it's possible that people in the town knew Jesus a bit when he was younger, but then as he began a public ministry not long before this story happens, they got to know him more and more. As he arrives, he's approached by a centurion. This is a significant moment in the way that Matthew tells us the story. Out of the four Gospels, Matthew is the one that's very Jewish in flavour. It was written by a Jewish man who understood Jewish thinking very well, and he tells his audience all about Jesus in a very Jewish way. He makes loads of connections with the Old Testament, things that we would not easily spot as 21st century Westerners. And he wants to demonstrate that Jesus fulfills it, to show every reader that Jesus is what the Old Testament is really pointing to. Basically, everything that's happened so far in this book is very, very Jewish. But then we get to this story, and this is the first time that Matthew gives us a positive picture of somebody who isn't Jewish. The centurion is basically the first character who's a Gentile that's not a baddie. And as we'll see, this is extremely deliberate. Who is this guy? Well, he's a centurion. At this time, the vast Roman Empire occupies Israel, which from their point of view is just a little backwater on the edge of the empire, not anywhere important. But as part of their occupation, they would have garrisons stationed in various places, one of which is in Capernaum. The centurion would have overseen around 100 men. He's the most senior Roman in town, and because the Romans are in charge of everything, he's the most powerful man in Capernaum. There aren't many details about him here, but Luke's Gospel also tells this story, and it shows us a bit more about this guy. It gives us some different bits of the conversation, and in Luke, some people come to Jesus before the centurion does to advocate for him, some of the religious leaders, and they say, Jesus, this man loves our nation, he built our synagogue. Although this centurion is the local leader of an empire that's taken over the whole country, he's popular. People like him. When they say he built their synagogue, that could either mean he paid for it to be done, or he got his soldiers to do a lot of the work, which they weren't obliged to do. Either way, this is incredible. This would be like if a local councillor or an MP who had nothing to do with church approached us and said, Hey Maybridge, I'd love to buy you a shiny new building out of my own money for no reason other than I love this place and want to support this community. Can you imagine? We'd be blown away. We'd love that person. And that's what this centurion seems to have been like. He's powerful, but he uses that power in a nice way. He's also very respectful to the spirituality of the people around him. He builds the synagogue, which the religious Jews love, but he also addresses Jesus as Lord. Now, throughout history, lots of people have addressed Jesus this way, of course, but this guy is one of the first. And this is significant because in this very Jewish book, the author is showing us one of the first people to have great reverence for Jesus, even to the point of calling him Lord, is not Jewish at all. He's a Gentile. And the centurion says, my servant lies at home paralysed, suffering terribly. That tells us a couple of more things about this guy. Firstly, he's bothered about his servant in a time when he could easily have just gone and got a new one. Remember, he's a nice guy. And secondly, he must believe that Jesus can do something about it, which is why he's come to him. This is early in Jesus' ministry. He's not super well known yet. And yet this man from a totally different and far more powerful culture has the humility to approach Jesus with great respect. Clearly he's heard stuff about him and he thinks, maybe he could heal my servant. It's certainly worth approaching him. Look at how Jesus responds. Jesus said to him, "Shall I come and heal him?" Very simple reply, but it says two important things. Firstly, Jesus has the confidence that he can heal this person. Now remember, it's not that they have a headache or a hurty thumb or a vague sense of uneasiness. They're paralysed. This is not the sort of healing you could fake or sort out with a bit of ibuprofen. Jesus assumes that he can heal this servant. But secondly, look at what Jesus doesn't assume. He asks a question. Shall I come? Would you like me to heal him? Now, Jesus does this quite often. He doesn't stand back and say, hey, everybody, stand back. I'm the Son of God. I'll heal all this in a flash of lightning, no problem. No, he gives dignity and respect to people by often asking them what they would like to happen. We are so very often assumptive about what people want, but here's Jesus taking the time to listen first. It's classic Jesus. On the one hand, completely confident that he has enormous authority. On the other hand, very pastoral and quick to listen. So Jesus extends this respect, but then the exchange they have is remarkable. Let's look. The centurion replied, "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." This would have been incredibly surprising. Here's this powerful centurion saying to Jesus, who at this point most people think is just a bit of a strange teacher, "I don't deserve to come under your roof. I don't deserve to have you under my roof." It's incredibly humble and reverential, but it shows great awareness because in Jewish culture, going into the home of a Gentile wasn't done. And this centurion knows this and appreciates it. He wants Jesus' help, he's desperate, but he also doesn't want to make it awkward for him by getting him to come into his house. Now we know with hindsight, Jesus would have had no problem going to the man's house, but the centurion doesn't know this. He's just trying to go about everything the right way. He also sees Jesus as incredibly powerful. Being a centurion, he knows what hierarchy is. There's 100 men who have to do whatever he says, and if they don't, they might get stoned to death. So nobody says no to him. He's also under authority. He would have reported to his own commanding officer. So his whole life is built around hierarchy and authority. You could say he knows power when he sees it. At this time, all authority in the Roman Empire belonged to the emperor, who delegated authority to others under his command. Rome had been a republic until about 30 BC, and from then on, beginning with Caesar Augustus, the emperors had supreme authority over the whole empire. When a centurion gave a command, it carried the authority of the empire. People had to obey. A soldier who disobeyed an order that the centurion gave was technically disobeying the emperor, so it was thought. The centurion saw that Jesus worked in a similar system. He sees that Jesus is somehow under God's authority, but at the same time he carries God's authority. When Jesus spoke, God spoke. He therefore believed that Jesus must have God's authority to heal sickness. So this centurion, who carries the authority of the emperor, meets Jesus, an obscure Jewish teacher, and he somehow realises, you outrank me. You've got more authority than I have, and I need to treat you with great reverence. I need to defer to you. And what's important to see here is that while the centurion definitely believes that Jesus can heal his servant, he doesn't demand that he will or assume that he will. He's here to ask nicely. He doesn't assume to know the will of God. And as we'll see in a moment, the centurion shows great faith, but that faith is in knowing what authority has and Jesus has and not presuming to know how he will use it. That's an important distinction. Look at how Jesus responds. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed and said to those following him, "Truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." On the face of it, this is a really weird reply. Jesus, could you not have just healed the servant? Why all this heavy stuff about Israel and weeping and gnashing of teeth? There are only 2 times in the whole of the 4 Gospels where Jesus is amazed by something. Across all the stories, everything that happens, there's only twice that he's amazed. If you're Jesus and you've got a unique insight into human nature, it's quite hard to be amazed. You know what people are like. They don't shock you. But this man amazes Jesus. The one other time when Jesus is amazed is in Mark's Gospel, when he's amazed by the lack of faith from his own people, the Jews. So both times Jesus is amazed, it's about faith, either because it's there or because it isn't. Now, because it's so important to what's going on in this story, I'm just going to take a moment to stop and define what faith is. And the reason for this is that in our time, the word faith has been changed to mean something very different from what it actually means. And I personally find this incredibly irritating. The way our culture defines faith in the Christian sense is something like this. Our culture thinks that Christian faith is an unquestioning belief in something with no evidence for believing it. You may have heard that. That's how our culture thinks of faith. I cannot tell you how many comments and questions I've heard from people that think that Christianity is blindly putting trust in a load of things for no other reason than we think it sounds nice. That's not what faith means. In the Christian sense, faith is investing our trust into something we have reason to believe. We don't follow Jesus, build our lives around Jesus and everything he says because it feels good. If it feels good, that's great, that's a great bonus. We place our trust in Jesus because we think there are great reasons for doing so. Obviously, not every Christian has thought about these reasons, but as a community of billions of people around the world, certainly some of us have thought about it. We've looked at the evidence for the resurrection, we've wrestled with philosophical and scientific arguments about God, and we've investigated the reasons to believe that the New Testament is spot on in what it says. The Bible encourages us to use our brains. Jesus tells people to count the cost of following him. There's nowhere in the whole thing that says just believe this and don't ask questions. This centurion is a brilliant example of faith done properly. He's no fool. He's been chosen to lead a garrison. He's clearly made an effort to learn the local culture and religious customs. He's heard stuff about Jesus from people he trusts, to the point that he has enormous respect for him and believes he has the authority to heal sickness. Roman centurions didn't go around randomly treating local religious teachers this way. No, this centurion knows things that cause him to place faith in Jesus. And perhaps a better word for us to use in day-to-day life than faith would be trust, because when it boils down to it, Christian faith is essentially about trust. Do you trust Jesus? Do you think there are good reasons to trust him? This man certainly does. And so Jesus is amazed by his faith. But next he tells us why, and he says, "Truly I tell you," which is basically Jesus' way of saying, come on, listen to this. This is really important. And to understand what Jesus tells them, you have to know something about what people believed at the time. In ancient Israel, the Jews knew that they were the chosen people of God. Not because they were better than anybody else, it's just that God had to choose a particular race to reveal himself to the world, to tell his story, to show what he's like. That's the backdrop of the Old Testament in a nutshell. Human nature being what it is, there were plenty of people over time who became very presumptuous around this, very arrogant about their place. And when Jesus spoke, many Jews would have assumed that they were fine with God, that they were cool with God, simply because they were ethnically Jewish, regardless of anything else. And so when Jesus talks about a Roman centurion, a likeable man, but a symbol of the oppressive empire, and says, "I've not found anyone in Israel with such great faith," he totally undermines any sense of superiority the Jews may have had. Basically, he's saying, it's not about your heritage, it's not your religious history that God is interested in, it's what you do with him. This was shocking. He carries on in a very descriptive way. "I say to you, many will come from the east and the west and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven." This is the nice bit. In the Old Testament, one of the pictures of the future God has for his people is a great banquet, a celebration with food and drink. Many Jews would have assumed this was pretty much a Jewish party. Imagine a sort of eternal bar mitzvah. But Jesus says, no, people will come from the east and west. They'll come from all over. Other people will be there. Abraham, Isaac and Jacob were the sort of founding fathers of the Jewish people. And by mentioning them, Jesus is saying, yeah, those guys are there. Abraham, Isaac and Jacob are there. Which reminds us, God hasn't forgotten these Jewish people. It's still at root a Jewish story, a Jewish idea. But everybody else can get involved. That's the bit that sounds great if you're not Jewish. And it is. Everyone is invited to this banquet. Everyone is invited to be part of the kingdom of God. Ethnicity has nothing to do with it. Jesus says this will be many people. But then the not so nice bit. Jesus says, but the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The subjects of the kingdom are the Jews who thought they were special because of who they descended from. They thought having the big guys in their family tree was enough. What Jesus said would have been horrifying, and really it still is. Whilst many Gentiles would be invited in, the arrogant Jews, not all the Jews, the arrogant ones, who thought themselves superior, would be cast out to a place of gnashing teeth and weeping, a place of darkness. Now that was a common description for a place called Gehenna, which was just outside the city of Jerusalem. And in a very dark period of the Old Testament, some kings had killed their own children there, absolutely awful. And so Gehenna was associated with the most terrible misery you could imagine. And that's why it served as a common picture of what we would call hell, of separation from God and all his goodness. And so what Jesus says here is incredibly serious. And he speaks of this not to be annoying, because he doesn't want anyone to go there. And the way out, the one way out, is through him. And so Jesus uses this conversation, this request for help, as an opportunity to teach everybody about the central thing that's always on his mind. What's your faith in? Who do you trust? It matters. And then right at the end of the story, it simply says this one line. Then Jesus said to the centurion, "Go, let it be done as you believed it would." And his servant was healed at that moment. This is something that happens quite often in the account of Jesus' life. With our modern 21st century minds, we're often sceptical about miracles. We find them hard to believe, and we should. But in the New Testament, while there are miracles, they don't tend to be the main event. Those who write about them cover them in a few lines or less. When I was younger, when I read the Bible, I looked at all the miracles that Jesus did, and I thought they were sort of like a sequence of proofs that he was God, like a sort of CV. Look, he did this and that, so he must be God. Now, there's some truth to that, but the more you read about the miracles of Jesus, many of them are like footnotes. They're not the main thing. It's like the authors and Jesus himself are saying, there's these miracles and they're amazing, but they're less important than what Jesus says in this conversation. Listen to this. And this is a great example of exactly that thing. Healing the centurion's servant was incredible. The difference it made to his life, to the centurion, to his family, everybody. It was huge. But it's less important than what Jesus communicated when he saw the faith of the centurion. Jesus is never amazed by miracles. He's amazed by faith, or the lack of it. That's what he focuses on time and again. And it's because his concern is much greater than seeing someone healed. He's concerned about where they are with God. Being healed of a terrible illness or blindness or paralysis, amazing. Who wouldn't want that? Of course. But Jesus thinks even bigger picture. He wants people to be part of the kingdom of God with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob forever, and it's accessed by faith. When Jesus speaks of hell, or even when his followers do, people get offended. We hate the idea of ending up there. We might be like the Jews who thought their ethnicity was what it's all about. I mean, for us, maybe there's other reasons we think we'll be okay, like our good works or being nice people or attending church or whatever. We're offended that that's not enough. But listen to Jesus' warning. He doesn't want anyone to end up there. For goodness sake, the whole reason he came to earth, suffered, was crucified and rose again was entirely because he doesn't want us to go there. We don't have to. He's not the problem. He's like the doctor who diagnosed the sickness, invented the cure, packaged it up and presented it to us, and all we have to do is receive it. All we have to do is admit that we need him and place our trust in him. The only real obstacle is our own pride, just as it was for the Jews who thought that their own ancestry was enough. And so this is a story not about Jesus healing a centurion's servant, although that's cool, but about the importance and nature of faith. So here's a few observations to finish about faith and what I think it means for us right now in terms of what we can see in this story. Firstly, faith is not a feeling. This is so important. Feelings come and go, they're up and down. They're really important things to be aware of and talk about. It's definitely true. But the sort of faith Jesus is looking for is not just feelings. When the centurion approached Jesus, he had strong feelings about his servant. He loved them, he wanted them to get better. But the way he approaches Jesus and understands the authority of Jesus is not emotions. It's considered and rational, like you'd expect from a military man. Faith is a choice. It's a long-term commitment based on thinking something through. Over the last year, church has looked very different. Many of us, we weren't ready for it, of course. And we might feel our faith has been shaken as life has changed and we've missed connection with other people. But here's the thing. Don't measure your faith by how you feel each day. Don't measure your faith by how you feel. In the last year, if you've still tried to follow Jesus, even when there are lots of times you haven't felt like it, that's not a lack of faith. That's actually more faith. You've done it without the feelings to propel you. That's authentic and real, and it will pay off, even if you can't see it yet. Stick with him. Secondly, faith is not about you. The religious Jews who thought they were all good with God because of their great-great-great-granddads were just like people in all times and places who think that being faithful to God is about you, your family background, your good works, your popularity, your success, your great effort, your church involvement. Every single worldview, theistic, atheistic, whatever, ultimately comes back to you. You do the right things, you have the right attitude, you be a good person, and so on. Christianity is the one exception. It's not about what you've done. Remember, it's about what he did. If you want to be proud, Christianity is the worst thing ever. Properly understood, it gives no room at all for pride. And that's hard. But here it's also the ultimate reassurance. Just trust Jesus. The centurion in the story was by anyone's standards a good bloke. People liked him. They respected him. He was a leader. But he does not approach Jesus by appealing to his own goodness. He doesn't say, Jesus, I'm a nice guy. Look, I built a synagogue over there. You can see it. For your people. So you probably owe me a nice healing miracle. No. He amazes Jesus because he acknowledges his authority. But even more than that, he trusts Jesus with the outcome, with the thing that he wants. Which leads to the third thing. 3, faith is not demanding. Real faith doesn't demand things from God. We might have extensive wish lists, things that we wish were true. We might pray through them, and there's nothing wrong with that. But look at how the centurion goes about it. No justifications or demands, just a humble request. And we have plenty of things to pray for right now. People who want healing, a nation struggling through a pandemic, the likes of which we haven't seen in our lives, possible economic hardship to come, lots to pray about. We want God to intercede, of course. But faith is not believing that God will give us everything we want. That's not what faith is. Genuine faith is presenting our requests to God, but trusting him with the outcome. It's believing he knows better. It's believing that even if things don't go how we want, maybe even very painful things, he's still good. He still knows better. So let's be a church that prays. Let's ask for big things. And let's have it right, though. Faith is leaving the results to God. Faith is not demanding. And fourthly, most importantly, it's all about Jesus. Faith is all about Jesus. I just said 3 things about what faith is not. This is what it is. In this story, Jesus lifts our thinking above miracles, which don't seem to be a challenge for him, and towards the bigger picture. He wants us to join him in the kingdom of God's people, and putting faith or trust in him is the way in, and it's the way to live beyond. This little story itself is a picture of what happens on a bigger scale. Jesus saves a suffering servant, which is really good news to this one Gentile. But later on he becomes a suffering servant on purpose to be good news to every Gentile. He's the greater centurion, the one with true authority. He's the greater servant, the one who takes on everyone's burdens. He's the greater Israel, the one who actually lives out the way God intended. He's the greater healing miracle. He's the one who gives life in all its fullness forever. And so where's your faith right now? Most people don't make faith decisions overnight. They drift into them as the ways of the world chip away and put messages about what's true into our minds through every comment, a newspaper article, a movie, an advert, and tough situation and relationship breakdown. How has this pandemic been shaping your faith? Do you want to follow Jesus more, or are you slowly drifting towards more of yourself? Let me pray. Father, thank you for Jesus. Thank you that he demonstrates absolutely everything that you want from us. Thank you that he died on the cross for us. Thank you for the example of this centurion as well and what faith really looks like. And I pray you would grow authentic faith in us. It's not something we can just drum up by trying harder. There are things we can do that help, but ultimately, Lord, faith is a gift from you. Please give us it in abundance and shape us so that we can be people who represent you to one another and to our community. Amen.